somewhere along the way, the Jesus movement got hijacked. And thousands of years later, the Jesus movement ran into 21st century capitalism, combined with a deeply entrenched political movement that had 1,000 other motives. And I think it's so important for people to understand this thing that calls itself Jesus is so far from its roots.
That is Rob Bell, one of the most influential preachers in the world.
Rob Bell has been raising a lot of eyebrows lately for his evolving views about Christianity and the Bible.
Some evangelicals are calling it twisted scripture, also inspiring charges of heresy.
But ladies and gentlemen, this man is a false teacher. He teaches lies. He does not obey the commandments of God because he doesn't love God. But Rob Bell should fear God because he's a liar and he's a heretic.
Rob Bell will tell you that you can keep being a homo and still get to heaven. But when a man gets saved, he becomes homo no more.
You have transgressed the laws of the living God, and you shall pay for it.
One megachurch pastor has ignited a theological firestorm.
Men like Rob Bell, they claim to be working of God. They claim to be preaching and speaking the words of God.
Rob Bell does not seem to understand the basics of the gospel.
If you can still feel bad about your sin, don't go in this way because Rob Bell is a robber. He wants to dull your conscience. He wants to dull the voice of God.
Okay, so for someone that doesn't know you, tell me, I don't know, how do you describe you? Like, what's your name? What's your work? What you do?
My name is Rob Bell, Robert Holmes Bell Jr., born in 1970. I make things. I was trained as a pastor, so I started giving sermons.
Okay, how would I describe Rob? First of all, I always have to sort of grin the second I even think of his name because he has such joyful vitality.
Ladies and gentlemen, the spiritual and lyrical Jesse James, Pastor Rob Bell. Give it up, the gangster of God.
Rob is somebody who loves life. Like he seems to find the essence of life and then embrace it.
Rob has a kind of infecting enthusiasm for life, for people, for ideas. I think at the core, he wants to help people.
I had some sense like this was an art form that needed to be reclaimed. Like you think about Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream. That was a sermon. But nobody was like, oh, he was funnier last week. You know what I mean? You were caught up in something. It was dangerous, subversive, hopeful. It wasn't about essentially building up a particular religion. It was about what it means to be human.
Time magazine named him one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Please join me in welcoming Rob Bell.
When I first met Rob, what I was confronted with was someone who was without fear, someone who loved life, someone who was passionate about life.
He's a provocateur intellectually and spiritually in a way that just draws people deeper.
So God is for humans flourishing.
Yes, yeah. And on earth is where it matters.
And it's my honor to welcome to the show live in studio, Pastor Rob Bell, everybody. Rob Bell!
He gets science involved, he gets art involved, he gets pain involved, he gets inner faith involved, and he's fearless and free.
Essentially, at every stage of our lives, there's somebody leaning a ladder up against a building going, this is how you climb. And then there's that moment when you're driving to work that one morning and something within you is like, what is the point of any of this?
I think he is a paradigm shifter and shaper.
Thank you so much.
more than he realizes. I mean, this guy is so beautifully bridging intelligence and awareness and consciousness to reality that he's way ahead of his time.
Now, for thousands of years, people have told stories to hold them together. There's one story that's been around for several thousand years. The story goes something like this. Our tribe is the best. Our God is the best. Our way is the best. So come, join us, or we'll kick your ass. And you can raise a lot of money with that story. And you can build some pretty big buildings with that story. And you can justify a lot of war with that story. And there's another story that's come on strong recently. That story goes something like this. Yeah, there's nothing going on here. There's no bigger story. All we are is a collection of our cells and synapses and our biology. There's nothing else going on here. And actually, those ancient, primitive, magical, mythical stories about forces and beings and gods, that's actually part of the problem. We need to leave that behind. All there is us here now. Everything is essentially a survival of the fittest to a certain degree, and then you die, and that's it. And so what happens is these stories sort of bump up against each other, and sometimes they compete against each other. But I have this sense across our world that none of these stories are actually up to giving us the glue, giving us the meaning, giving us the arc and the narrative we actually need to live with hope and courage in the modern world.
So what was it originally that you saw that felt important and interesting?
When I was young, my parents would take us to church, and I remember sitting there thinking, this is the big stuff. This is the mojo. This is the juice. This is love, grace, peace, forgiveness. What are we doing here? We're on this floating ball of dirt and water hurtling through space at 67,000 miles an hour. Like, what is this thing we all just sort of assume to be life? And I remember sitting there, and I would sit there in church and think, this is the biggest stuff human beings have been wrestling with for thousands of years. This is the most interesting. This is the most interesting thing imaginable, yet why is this gathering so boring?
Back when Rob and I were dating, he was going to seminary. We used to go to lunch and talk about, like, if we were to start a church, what would it look like? So that started, I don't know, that was probably 5 years before Mars Hill started. So we had kind of been throwing things around for a while. Mars Hill started on a Sunday just by word of mouth. So the first Sunday, we were completely shocked by the number of people who came. I think there were 1,200 people who came. It was chaos. Just the number of cars, the people, but it was exciting. I mean, not only we were excited, but I think everyone who was there was excited because it felt like we were all part of something that was happening, something new that was happening.
It didn't slow down really for the first 5, 6, 7, 8 years. It just kept kind of growing and ballooning.
It's possible for religious institutions and for churches to actually work against an integrated, holistic spirituality.
He's going to say things that everyone is floating around in the back of people's minds or hearts, and he's going to say it, and it's going to piss people off. And it did.
You will often run in religious communities and faith communities to the idea, if you would just repent, then God would. And so communities take on their own, if you would just step through these hoops, if you would just go through these 4 steps, then God would. But for the first Christians, repentance was never, if you would just do these things, then God would do these things. It was, do you understand what God has done? And you are now being invited to simply trust it. Repentance was never trying to get God to do something, because God has already made peace with all things. If you are repenting so that God will somehow show up and do something, you are bargaining with the wrong kind of God. There were a number of years there where it got very big and I was giving these sermons and the posture of, here's what's true and I'm gonna get you to believe what's true, that way of thinking about it just didn't work. And I started taking the whole thing apart. I just happened to be, at the time, pastor of a megachurch, especially the God, like some being somewhere else who comes here from time to time and maybe gets involved or doesn't get involved, or maybe intervenes or doesn't intervene, or maybe answers a prayer or doesn't answer a prayer. That conception of the divine, because it would have been nice to have showed up at the Holocaust, by the way. That conception of the divine was actually what was dying.
Rob is somebody who was raised in a very particularly narrow spiritual tradition, who, like many people, from a young age found sustenance from that spiritual tradition, found enough sustenance from it that he decided to devote his life to it, and then matured in the evolution of his thinking to a place where the constructs of that spiritual tradition no longer worked for him. This is not an unusual story. Up until then, you're talking about a lot of people. The reaction that he had to that, though, has been so intensely creative.
The leadership was super scared. I think they sensed the kind of pressure he was putting on the church, but also it suddenly became this bigger thing. He's pushing on a trap door. And if this thing flies open, then it's, suddenly he's, instead of being like the coolest Christian in America, he's going to be the biggest heretic in America.
Several years ago, we had an art show at our church, and people brought in all kinds of sculptures and paintings, and we put them on display, and there was this one piece that had a quote from Gandhi in it. And lots of people found this piece compelling. They'd stop and sort of stare at it and take it in and reflect on it, but not everybody found it that compelling. Somewhere in the course of the art show, somebody attached a handwritten note to the piece, and on the note, they had written, "Reality check, he's in hell." Gandhi's in hell? He is? And someone knows this for sure and felt the need to let the rest of us know? Will only a few select people make it to heaven? And will billions and billions of people burn forever in hell? And if that's the case, how do you become one of the few? Is it what you believe, or what you say, or what you do, or who you know, or something that happens in your heart? Or do you need to be initiated or baptized or take a class or converted or being born again? How does one become one of these few?
When I read Love Wins, I said to Rob on the phone that they're going to crucify you. And I meant it.
When Love Wins came out, there was a certain segment of the Christian community who were angry about the book. They were up in arms about it. He put his finger on a doubt and a questioning that was in that community, but that wasn't able to be expressed.
The book is called Love Wins, a book about heaven, hell, and the fate of every person who ever lived. It's already created something of a stir in the evangelical Christian community because of Bell's provocative take on heaven and hell.
A Michigan pastor is stirring up controversy with an optimistic message about the afterlife, challenging traditional Christian ideas about hell.
At the Time magazine cover last week, where a preacher in Michigan who wrote a book says there's really no hell, that God is not a monster. He wouldn't assign any human being to eternal damnation. How do you answer that?
Well, first of all, I believe the man is a false teacher. I believe he's a heretic, because the Bible is very clear that there is a hell. And if you look at Revelation chapter 20, not only is a person condemned to hell, they are thrown into hell, Bill.
He's challenging a status quo that is profoundly invested in its conservative ideals. And they don't like it, right? Like, this is not going down easy for a lot of people, the stuff that he is saying. You stop preaching hell, people get really mad. People whose entire theology and their whole conservative construct is based on that, people get really, really, really upset.
If you, from an early age, are told you might get tortured forever in hell, you essentially, what you hear, especially as a kid, is the universe is not a safe place. The universe is not a safe place, and the deepest, most powerful forces in reality might actually, in the end, align themselves against me. That's what the psyche or the soul hears.
You can never trust that God because that God is not trustworthy. You could tick him off and he'll change his attitude towards you, and you can go to hell. We were never into eternal security. We always felt saved, but never safe with God.
I guess I was told growing up that my natural self, because I was a human, was sinful. In other words, wrong, a problem to God. And such a severe problem that when I die, it's so nasty that God's gonna have to burn me for millions of years because he can't come near me. Now, what kind of creator can't accept his creation?
I grew up with that belief that, you know, if you don't know Jesus, you're going to hell. And I carried around a lot of guilt for not being able to share Christ with my friends. And I heard talks about how I might be their only hope. I carried around such guilt that I was responsible for my friends' eternal damnation.
What Rob was doing is the type of honest thinking usually reserved for comedian. I don't mean he was super punchy or like straightforwardly hilarious. I mean he was thinking critically in a way that comedians normally are paid to think. Specifically when he was like, the age of accountability, just this whole thing that no one talks about. And when he said the age of accountability, I'm sure people know, before you reach a certain age, different churches differ on the age, but before you reach a certain age, if you die, you go straight to heaven. So if a child dies, it goes to heaven. And then Rob says, wouldn't it be more gracious to murder a child and guarantee eternity in heaven than let it live out and flip a coin? It could go to hell. And I was like, holy shit, that's it. That's what a comedian would say. And that's what like the weird guy at the party would say, but it's not what someone typically would say in love. You know what I mean? Not just to deconstruct it, but to go like, what are you saying? Is this really what we're selling? Is this really why this message has persisted all this time?
For many people in our culture, the fundamental way they understand heaven is evacuation. Jesus,
someplace else.
Yeah, essentially Jesus is the ticket, and if you believe, say, confess, repent, whatever the right, different stripe tells you, or the different tribe tells you is the way to do it, then you go somewhere else, somewhere other than this place. And so a lot of the dominant images then are of clouds and puppies and white robes and perfect hair.
So traditionalists are saying that you're actually changing the way in which the Bible's interpreted to make it more palatable to more people. How do you respond?
Well, first off, I wrote the book because I believe that God loves everybody everywhere. And at the essence of the Christian message is this announcement that Jesus has come to offer us this love and invite it to everybody. This is the most orthodox, straightforward, God so loved the world that God sent Jesus. So in many ways, the book is simply trying to reclaim, first and foremost, that beautiful, compelling essence of the Christian message.
Rob had stepped into a new freedom, I think, with Love Wins, which he was going to do the right thing. And that really, I think, scared people. Are you our pastor? What is this going to do to us? What's going to do to the budget? I mean, pretty quickly, Marcel had to make budget cuts because of this book. But I think he was like, no, this one needs to be done. And he sort of stepped into the thing that I think probably all people want to step into themselves, which is find a deeper sense of who they are. What do I really think and believe? What am I willing to risk here? Instead of how do we keep this thing safe and protected and everybody on board and kind of the ship is going in this direction.
When I was a kid, I would ride my bike to the Meridian Mall, which in Okemos, Michigan, which I think is the farthest you can get from an ocean on the face of the planet. And I would go to the Meridian Mall, and there was a community news center, and in the back of the community news center, which was like the bookstore, they had copies of Surfer magazine. And I would page through Surfer magazine. It was like piercing a veil. I mean, it was like, there are people who like paddle out in the ocean and ride waves. And then I get on my BMX bike and ride home. And so I was fully sucked into the allure, thousands of miles from an ocean. When you get in the ocean, you can't make anything happen. You adjust to what it's doing. It's almost like you listen with your whole being, or your whole body. And so much of the modern world is about mastery and grasping and manipulating. And when you enter into the ocean, you submit to whatever it's doing. And there is something about that does something to your soul.
Acclaimed author and one of my best friends and a renowned heretic. Acclaimed author, Robert Holmes Bell. That's his real name. Robert Bell, everybody. Rob Bell.
I think Rob struck a chord with a lot of people like me, specifically, who lost their faith, or worse, were in some sort of lukewarm, interim position with God that, not just Christmas and Easter, but they were just kind of inside. We're like, I'd rather not think about it. And then, as Rob so perfectly puts, we still felt an ache, I describe that ache as, what is this? I'm just like, what is this? And why is this?
But this is what happened to me, is I got trained in pastor world and then got into that, like, oh, you're be polite at all costs. And then stumbled in, I had this epiphany that Jesus was Jewish, which was, I know.
You could only talk to him for 15 minutes. That guy's attention span was in the shitter.
Right.
If you went long, it'd be like, it's been 15 minutes.
Right.
Watches haven't been invented
2 points
yet.
a story and you're out of there. but it was my immersion in the Jewish tradition, realizing the tradition I came out of stood on the shoulders of a much deeper tradition that was like bloody and dirty and sweaty and sexy and doubt and anger and people cursing things and throwing things, and it was this full-bodied, full-orbed experience, and wherever you at, it was okay. Because there was this binary of good and bad, winners, losers, success, failure, and God was always on the one side, and you kind of didn't know what to do with all the stuff on the other side. And when I stumbled into, oh, wait, no, if you go back farther. By the way, word radical means root, like a radish is a root vegetable. The radical isn't the one who wandered off into the deep weeds. The radical is the one who went back to the actual source of the tradition. So,
fucking A.
There's nothing more Western than turning the Bible or any book into, from a mysterious dance and a play and something to wrestle with and get messy with, and just turning it into a book of do's and don'ts. It's like, don't have sex before marriage, don't swear, don't drink, don't smoke, don't do drugs, love the Red Sox. Like, it's just like, what the fuck happened? You know what I mean? I know that me being me, right now I'm performing, just like I would even if the camera wasn't here. If you just came over my house, I would be performing. I don't sit this way when no one's here. I don't put on pants, you know what I'm saying? So there's this performance and there's this loneliness inside. It's not a bad loneliness, it's just kind of a private. It's a private world of swirls, and it's dark, and there's purples and greens and some strange memory, and it's very isolating to feel in there. So we all know what it's like to grapple with mystery, because we're dealing with it. We're creating metaphors all day. You're just like singing in the shower. It's really just a metaphor for how you're feeling inside. So we know that there are things that can't be put into words. Sometimes language fails how you're feeling, or sometimes just the top emotion wins out. Like, I'm angry, when really you're 50,000 things. And then religion comes along and it's just black and white. And we go like, but I'm not black and white. I'm mysterious. I'm dark and light. A nun occasionally thinks, look at this motherfucker. You know what I'm saying? We know everything is everything. It's all in there. And then the most interesting, infinite topic, God, just becomes two paint colors of Sherwin-Williams. It's either this one, do you want eggshell or do you want khaki? How did that happen?
For a lot of people, religion is what you believe. It's a set of views about the world, about the self, about God. And I think actually that what we see in the Bible is more about the how of belief. How does your belief function? Does your belief function to make you a more beautiful person, helping your neighbor? Or do your beliefs protect you from other people? Do they isolate you from the other?
Thank you, Michael.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. Oh, that is awesome. Look at that, Violet. That's pretty awesome. Yeah, look at that. Good times, huh?
Total is like $755, so we're at about $600 now. So it's going to be a full house.
That's amazing.
Which is awesome.
It never gets old, 25 years in. And
You still feel nervous before a show?
And it's like no matter how many times you work on it, you're still gonna go out there and we'll see what happens. Waited my whole life to say this. Good evening, Knoxville. Yes! And especially want to speak to those of you who were dragged here by a friend. And you just have this low-grade unease, like, what have I gotten myself into? And then your friend was like, oh, it's gonna be fine. In a previous life, he was a megachurch pastor in the Midwest. And you're like, now I do believe in hell. So a while ago, I had this idea. I was like, I should go to the Bible Belt and talk about the Bible. And it made me smile, and I would laugh to myself thinking, that's my idea of a good time. And well, first off, the philosopher Dallas Willard said, familiarity breeds unfamiliarity, and unfamiliarity can breed contempt. Something is so familiar and close, and you've been around it for so long that it can oddly become unfamiliar, and that can leave you open to downright contempt. And at a larger communal level, based on our sacred life together, even as a tribe, as humans, as a nation, how you read the Bible has serious implications for the kind of world we're creating. And we've even learned recently that bad readings of the Bible can actually get people elected. It's almost like there was this American narrative that got spun about who we are in the world. And actually for Americans, this deep-seated sense that there's a chance that our tribe and the way that we move in the world actually antagonizes other tribes. And this just conquer and crush everybody in your path, it's actually making everybody miserable. I think a lot of people are like, wait, there's something about this really destructive. It has an underbelly.
You say that, but yet we're in this part of the country where white evangelicals dominate. Why do you think so many evangelicals, white evangelicals, went for Trump?
Fear and power. The Bible was written by a minority group of people. They're conquered by Assyrians, Persians. At one point, the Babylonians conquer them. And then by the time of Jesus in the New Testament, it's the Romans. They've been conquered by one military superpower after another. They have been on the receiving end of a horrific amount of brutal violence and oppression. So they have very strong opinions about wealth, weapons, and drones. So if you read this ancient library as a citizen of the most powerful military superpower human civilization has ever created, we're 4% of the world's population, we have about 43% of its weapons. We're 4% of the world's population, we have about 40% of its wealth. How many military bases does Russia have outside of Russia? 8. France, how many military bases outside of France? 7. Great Britain, how many military bases outside of England? 6. How many military bases does the US have outside of the US? 660. And actually, most estimates say it's closer to 800. Last year, our government dropped 26,000 bombs. Last year, the Pentagon spent $660 million on advertising. Of whose money? Yours. Yeah, one guy, ours. Not a trick question. Keep up, Atlanta, let's go. Yeah. It's like on the test, it's like one oval to fill in with a pencil right there. Ours. This system that we're a part of is totally unprecedented in the history of the universe. So there is a chance, as a citizen of the most powerful military machine the world has ever seen, that in reading a book by people who are deeply suspicious of what happens when empire and weapons come together, there's a chance you might miss some of its central themes. Because when the writer of the Psalms says, "Some trust in chariots, but we trust in God," we're the ones with the chariots. Lots of people grew up in churches that had an American flag on the stage and had 4th of July services. And America, the flag and the Bible were like holding hands. But if you read the Bible honestly, the Bible holds the flag accountable. It has no interest in holding hands. It speaks truth to the flag. Because the flag can be beautiful, and the flag can also be deeply, deeply corrupt. And the flag can be life-giving, and the flag can also be very destructive.
This country was not built for atheists nor by atheists. It was built by Christian people who believed in the Word of God.
America was set apart in a special way.
What church do you go to? What is your belief system?
Go to a Bible-believing church.
Free market principles, constitutional liberties, and the Judeo-Christian values that built this great nation.
I'm a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican.
My second favorite book of all time. What's my first favorite book? The Bible.
You know, I'm leading with the Evangelicals. I'm a good Christian.
And will help us economically and spiritually. So today we pray for Donald Trump.
Yes.
I believe it was God. God showed up. He answered the prayers of hundreds of thousands of people across this land that have been praying for this country.
From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. And yes, together, we will make America great again. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.
We have lived as a tribal culture for so many generations, where the highest goal is to protect and preserve your tribe. But that won't work in the world as it is. We will have to move to some larger awareness that we are all of the same tribe. And so all of the nationalisms and all of the warped patriotism will have to be transcended by an awareness that we have one planet. And in some ways, all of the latest research that we are now realizing is way more grave than anybody realized, which is that we as human beings and our care for this planet, we are not living here in a sustainable way. And that pain of we have not taken care of the one planet we have, it will either break us and we will all move forward into greater consciousness and awareness of each other and the earth, or we will regress. At some level, this is connected with our survival. We're in a sound recording booth, and I'm recording the audio book for my book, What is the Bible? And this is my attempt to help people read the Bible in a much better way. Because my observation would be people either ignore the Bible or they read it through this lens of kind of stilted literalism that sucks all life out of it. This is subversive political poetry, among other things. And if you read it as you should read it, it all of a sudden becomes incredibly dangerous and beautiful and provocative and timely.
All right, we're going to get some levels on you. And what I'd like you to do is just for starters, go to the beginning of chapter 1. We're just going to read a little bit just to make sure we got some good levels with you.
Now, the book opens with a quote from the great poet Rainer Rilke, and the quote goes like this: "Try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are written in a very foreign tongue."
We're so glad to be able to offer this opportunity to you. Rob has not visited us before now, and we're thrilled that he's here. As an author, of course, and from his Robcast, and he has all kinds of interesting things to tell you. So please join me in welcoming Rob back.
A lot of books about the Bible are books of summary. Trying to boil it down, here's what it says. This is not a book about trying to summarize it. It's the other. I'm going the other direction. I'm not trying to summarize it. I'm trying to open it up. Trying to make it big and wide and read it with you so that maybe then you can read it too in new ways. We are crying out to be connected with something thousands of years old. And all the questions we're all wrestling with, people were wrestling with thousands of years ago. And just that alone can do something. We think we're looking for solutions, but first off, we're looking for solidarity. Hello. Yes.
We prepared for you.
Hi.
Hi.
Your first name?
Christine.
Christine. Hi. I'm not looking
Yes.
for
Hi, Sarah.
Sarah. Christine. Good to see you.
It's so
What's
good to
up?
meet you.
Come on.
Welcome.
For you. For you. Sure. How are you? Looking forward to seeing you. Thanks for having me.
I'm down in the house.
Nice.
This is gonna be big.
And a couple fun ones.
What's that? Oh, come on.
So many different points of views, opinions, judgments out there. That part of me sometimes just like screw the Bible, thought
Absolutely.
process. Just kind of
Sure.
like screw this because it's very contradictory in the things it says. One person says something different than someone else. Someone said that God said something, and how do we know that's the truth? And
yeah, and I begin by saying, you're right. The Bible has caused so much damage. In many ways, it's often been an agent of dragging everything backwards, and it hasn't participated in the ongoing evolution of humanity. It's been a voice for primitive, outdated, violent, barbaric forces. I mean, even in our culture right now. So I'm aware that in 2017 to put out a book with the word Bible in it, for many people, just the word is like, seriously, come on.
Right.
And actually, I think part of my work has been, to me, that's an injustice. And part of it is showing people what you were told wrong. And most people aren't reading it well. From the hardcore right-wing religious to the hardcore against the Bible, most of them are reading it as fundamentalists.
Great.
if you're a slave in Egypt and you're owned by Pharaoh, and Pharaoh is believed to be a god, and the son of Pharaoh is believed to be the son of God, then in Egypt, your question if you're a slave is, are the gods okay with this setup? And the answer in Egypt was, yeah. The gods are fine with you being a slave and being owned. In fact, the gods ordered and ordained this relationship where you are a slave. This Hebrew story comes in and says, oh, this Hebrew God hears the cry of the oppressed, is not okay with this relationship. And get ready, because tomorrow is not going to be a repeat of today. There's going to be a disruption, and you're going to be liberated. So this Exodus story said to every person who's ever been bullied, to everyone who's ever had a boss that was a small man trying to do a big job. I know what I'm talking about. Anybody who's ever had the boot of the empire on their neck. The Exodus story was about liberation, but it was a warning to anybody in power. If you misuse your power to oppress or harm others, your power is fragile and may be subverted by the God of the underdog. This is turning into a sermon. In some places they do waving white hankies, but this is a university campus, so it's like, I'll have to blog about that later. I'll discuss that with my colleagues. So then this story eventually ends up in Jerusalem, and we're introduced to King Solomon, who is David's son. He's the son of David. And we're told that King Solomon is wealthy and wise. We're told that King Solomon is building gardens. He's building a palace. And then we're told that King Solomon builds a temple to honor God. And then the narrator says, and he was building the temple using slave labor. Solomon is building a temple to honor the God who liberates people from enslavement using slaves. It would be like Solomon has forgot the stories of his people. It would be like, imagine if there was a nation of immigrants. Thank you. You've been great. Nice to meet you. Thank you for coming. Hi. Hi, Jessica. How are you? I loved it. Thank you. Thanks for having me. We had fun, didn't we?
When typically does like faith or spirituality or some kind of search like enter someone's life? And I'm kind of curious, like, who are the people that seek out the work?
Oh yeah. Well, I begin with the assumption that everybody's always searching. Everything is a search for that which might actually satisfy. So even the idea of religious and non-religious people, I'm like, come on. It's all just different expressions of the same thing, which is, who am I? What am I doing here? To me, there is the human experience, and it cuts across. And in some ways, what I've tried to do is park. I don't even know if I tried to do it. I've just always wanted to be talking to the place in people that's in everybody. You know what I mean? Because people will often ask, people often be like, well, who's it for? And I've never, ever had an answer other than people, humans, featherless bipeds. Because I start there with the universal human longing. It's as much about the absence of the divine as it is about the presence of the divine. Jesus on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? This is the day that God becomes an atheist. How you doing on that one? Some of you have Apple Rainbow Death Wheel right now. You're like, wait. Yeah. The Bible is as much praise and honor and certainty as it is uncertainty, dark night of the soul, and why do you hide your face, and how could this have happened? There's a collection of poems called the Lamentations, and the word Lamentations comes from a Hebrew word, and the Hebrew word translates literally how. how this cancer, how this oppression, how this slavery, how this divorce, how. It's about the questions that you ask when you are convinced that there's nobody running the show upstairs. And so what I notice is how many times in our culture, like the debate is the atheist versus the believer. And they duke it out, when in fact, denial and affirmation are both very real responses to the struggles of life. They're not in opposition, they're dimensions of what it means to be alive.
Why do we need the Bible still today? If we feel like logic, science, we have all these great things, we're in a comfortable position, why do we still need a Bible?
The questions that we are asking right now, what did 1 million people kill themselves last year? The questions that we are asking about power, violence, mental health, how do you forgive people who have wronged you, like really wronged you, like somebody who was abused by their parents? These questions that we are asking right now in 2017, people have been wrestling with this and asking these questions for thousands of years. And our culture continues to get more surface, sliding down the surface of things. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Our culture is more and more like, how many views did that YouTube video get? It's almost like our culture is becoming more and more all treble and no bass.
Yeah, I like that.
And there's a bass note of human solidarity, that you aren't the first person to shake your fist at the heavens. At the heart of the Jesus movement was this belief in the reconciliation, the renewal, and the restoration of all things. Everything broken being fixed, everything that's wandered coming home, everything that lost the plot rediscovering its true story. So this movement always had as its center a new heaven and a new earth is one of the terms. So it was never about, well, this group's out, nice try. We're gonna party, apparently you had your moment. No, it was always, and the images are a feast, banquet, party, a celebration, and everybody's welcome.
Hi.
Hello.
It's very nice to
What's
meet
your name?
you. Meg. You just signed my book, and
Oh,
I just
great.
want to say thank you so much for your
My
book.
pleasure.
I have learned so much. Growing up a fundamentalist, this is eye-opening.
Great.
So, yeah, thank you.
Good.
So much.
Picture of you.
Of course. At every juncture in Luke's gospel, when there's somebody who's been kicked to the edges, Jesus embraces and includes. Samaritans, in. Women, in. Lepers, in. Sidonians, in. That actually, one of the major arcs of the Gospel of Luke is inclusion. It's whoever the system has pushed to the edges, no, they're part of it. And there were a number of people, the religious establishment, who believed the reason why we've been conquered by the Romans is because of these sinners who have done all these horrible things. So if you were to dine with a sinner, you're saying that that doesn't matter. So all those times when you're like, why does Jesus keep having, was he hungry a lot? Why is he having so many meals? A meal was a bold cultural, political statement about who's in and who's out. And when you dined with somebody, what you're saying is they have God's favor as well, which is why probably in the end he gets killed, as he keeps challenging a system that says they're out and they're in with inclusion. And what's fascinating to me is how many people, when you talk about the Bible, inclusion isn't one of the general themes they would immediately come up with. And yet if you actually read these ancient stories, this in years ago, in different culture, in different place, with all sorts of different values, nevertheless, this is what these writers were doing. What kept happening is when I kept going into the Jesus teachings, it took me beyond a religion to what does it mean to be human. And I actually think Jesus would be absolutely mortified that somebody started a religion in his name. I think he'd be like, you did what? You started another thing to divide people? When I came to bring you into universal solidarity with all human beings, where you wouldn't be obsessed with divisions and labels and dividers and boundaries, but you would be overwhelmed with the common human solidarity we have with each other. So I actually think the actual Jesus message, I think,
isn't when people endlessly cling to, well, I'm a Christian. Do you think they're a Christian? Well, they're a true Christian. I don't know. Do you think he's a Christian? Well, he just met with Christian leaders, so I think that we probably should vote for him.
Well, if you think about the religion that's arisen in Jesus' name, how it's become so, in many ways, corrupted. So many expressions of it. Some are beautiful, but so much of the dominant expressions of it are completely corrupted. They're like a temple that needs to be torn down. And realizing just how much of what goes on in Jesus' name is antichrist in its energy and direction. It is anti what Jesus was talking about. And realizing that more and more, it's just better to be clear about that.
Don't you feel like we're kind of in the midst of another
Yes.
spiritual revolution?
Absolutely. Buddhism, Judaism, at some level Hinduism, Christian faith, their origins are about Islam, 1,000 to 2,000 years old. So the most dominant ways people have come to understand spirit.
Yeah.
Those ideas were first brought together a couple thousand years ago. So people had a flat earth, didn't know about germs, thought the earth was the center of the solar system.
Yeah.
So these traditions, and Ken Wilber, lots of people have said very eloquent things about this, they got us really far. But what we know in the past 100 years about the psyche, about neurochemistry, about astrophysics, about a Tesla that has a trunk in the front and back. Tonight I'm going to tell about my friend's Tesla, who he got an email the other day that while he was sleeping, they had fixed his brakes through Wi-Fi.
What? Get out of here.
So, and all of this has happened in the past 100 years. So we are going through a revolution because these great, great traditions have to be expanded. You can keep them. I'm all about resurrection, fantastic. But if you don't speak to the world we're now living in, I mean, what is it? What percentage of England even would say they're religious? Like the religions have failed. Anything that you dip below 10%, you failed. You're a candidate running for president and you go below 10%, your campaign's on life support. Right. But in large portions of the Western world, you're way under 10% would even identify with a religious tradition. So essentially they failed. And yet, we're more hungry than ever.
Yeah.
So your thing of are we in the midst of something? Yes. Because we're more hungry than ever, and yet the dominant ways that human beings for thousands of years got water for that thirst and food for that hunger have at some level failed. So you have to be honest about the failure, and then you have to say, so what does the next thing look like? So if you have a Jesus community and you're not talking about our connection with the soil,
Yeah.
then you're part of the problem. If you don't have anything in your Jesus community, if you don't have a big, wide open embrace of science, you're done. Obviously women's rights, LGBT, minorities, love of our Muslim neighbors, if those aren't all just basics, done. Done.
Yeah. Come on, man.
That's what's happening. And so you have some death throes, some death rattle, which might be loud for a little bit, but otherwise, there's a whole thing that's over.
I think the greatest story ever told may just be the greatest story ever sold. And we bought it, or bought into it. And it's so screwed up the collective consciousness of the planet. This God we've made up isn't working, and we have lied to ourselves, to the world, and to it. We need to rethink. The word repent, metanoia, means to change the mind, or to rethink, or reconsider, or after you've thought, think again.
There is no space that is solely devoted to human beings waking up to our responsibility as spiritual beings to care for each other and care for our world. other than spirituality and religion, which have utterly failed millions and millions of people. But ideally, religion and spirituality are designed to help wake you up, to grow you in an expansive, compassionate, inclusive embrace and understanding of who you are and what you're doing here and what our shared common life looks like together. Otherwise, law can only go so far, academics can only go so far, business can only go so far, technology can only go so far, and the problem is, if people don't wake up, then they use those disciplines to create even more havoc. So you have corrupt business practices, you have institutions that don't prepare people to do anything that brings them any joy or meaning or any good service to the world. You have technology in the wrong hands, and it just allows people to harm each other even more. So we actually need this more than ever. And what people don't want anything to do with is bad religion, which they shouldn't. But actual training, help, education, insight, practices that can shape your heart, that can give you a calm center, that can teach you how to forgive somebody who's wronged you, which doesn't mean that you condone or approve of what they did. This is more needed than ever.
What happens after Darwinism is that you get a world full of scientists who have no soul and the religious who have no mind, right? And that's what's lost, right? That's a serious loss. You can't be soulless and have a life of any sort of meaning. You can't be. And you can't be mindless and have a life of any sort of meaning. So the tricky thing is their books don't match, right? Like their stories don't meld and their books don't match. So I think until you can create some sort of way of being in the world that is both soulful and mindful, you're going to have a bunch of people who are very hurt and very broken. Rob puts it really well when he says this whole idea of this is all pure science, everything is rational, everything can be explained, is all well and good until somebody puts your firstborn child in your arms and something happens to you that you can't identify scientifically until you're standing on the edge of the grave of somebody who was the world to you, and that feeling that you have needs bigger language.
When people tell me they've lost their faith, if they grew up like me, and they grew up literal, fundamentalist, Bible-believing Christians, and they say, I lost my faith, I really do think that's a mitzvah and it's nice. But then I'm always like, okay, talk to me in 5 years. I'm not saying that you don't have anything to say now, but I'm just saying you've just kind of begun the really fun and messy destruction of all the bullshit that you just really can't stand anymore. And it feels so good to go into your house and throw away that ottoman that you never wanted. You never wanted the one true way, turn or burn ottoman. You never wanted it. You wanted something. You wanted something. You didn't know what it was, but they gave you this. And then it gets very exciting and it's very intoxicating to throw that out. And then you can just have this kind of empty room, and that can be fine, but I think what's lost when we completely throw away the exploration of something behind what we see, something beyond electrons and quarks or whatever, some sort of divine order, some sort of consciousness.
Is something moving the whole thing forward? Is there something that undergirds all of reality that is pulling it into greater complexity, depth, unity, inclusion? Or is there nothing going on here? Are we just a sum of our synapses, our cells, our parts? Because I think the only rational response to the world is that of the epiphenomena. The parts together make up a whole that has all these properties that aren't present in the parts. There's something present among us that is greater than us, that can't be explained by just being the sum of the parts. That to me is the greatest argument. We used to have slaves, now we don't. Why are things that were once totally understood and accepted now we reject them as being unjust and horrific. Why? Why do we have this sense that we used to be back there, primitive, barbaric, violent, and now we're here, but we need to keep going because there's still areas where we need to keep going? Why does every human have a sense that we were there and we've moved and we need to keep going? What is that? It's the giant question at the heart of the human experience. And I think God is the best name for it.
It's been referred to spark, like the fuel of the universe. Some have called it spirit. Some have called it like an engine of the universe. There are even some, you may have read about them in books, there are even some who have referred to this as God. Now, maybe you can't do the whole God thing. Okay. Maybe you're like, no way, I can't, that word God. Nope. Maybe for you, the word God is all wrapped up in what feels to you like a step backwards. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Okay, that's fine. Okay, not a big deal. If you don't want to use the word God, that's okay. It's not a big deal. Then don't use it. Although, this will probably come up under a different name. Are you with me? And actually, my friends who don't believe in God, when we talk about the God that they don't believe in, I don't believe in that God either. And actually, sometimes when people said like they could never embrace the idea of a God, and I say, well, tell me about how you understand God, and they talk about the God that they were handed growing up, I think, oh, dear Lord, I think atheism is actually the most healthy spiritual response to that view of God. Are you with me? So let's leave behind labels and names and words, if we have to, that aren't helpful, and let's get back to now, what is this thing at work here?
It's not that we're split between people who are certain and people who have questions and doubts. For me, it's mostly actually that there are people who have doubts and questions, but hide from them, push them down, and those who are able to make space for them. Most people do have questions and concerns about the world. I mean, no matter how certain you are about your perspective, there's a certain sense that you get when you're a child that maybe you believe what you believe because of your parents, your culture, the language you were given, the books that you're given to read. There's a certain sense in which it's almost like we're someone who decides what we believe through the throwing of 3 dice. Because in a sense, we're thrown into the world. If I was born somewhere else, in some other country, at some other time, with some other language, I'd probably believe something very different. But it's frightening to open yourself up to that. You think your world is going to unravel. But interestingly, the word unraveling is the same as the word raveling. To ravel means to pull apart. It just doesn't have the negative bit to it. And a lot of the work of someone like Rob is to say, don't fear unraveling. It's actually positive.
People who bring up the challenging questions are the ones who help bring innovation and creativity. I mean, if I look at my tradition, look at the Torah and the prophets were people who stood up against the majority and said, this is not okay. We are not living the life we're supposed to be living. I mean, change it, wake up, do something about it. I think what he's trying to do is deepen people's connection to their faith. He's not trying to tell people to give up on it.
So I started doing club and theater tours in 2006. The venues kept getting bigger. I mean, like solid. I was like doing the rooms that my favorite bands do. It was that like, whoa. And then Love Wins came out in 2011. And that fall I did a club and theater tour. And I'll never forget the booking agent saying, yeah, tickets aren't selling that well. And then, I mean, I would go to a town where last time I was there, it sold out with 1,000 people, 1,200 people. And I'd walk out on stage and there'd be 50 people huddled in the middle of this cavernous theater. And a friend of mine, I remember saying, dude, you lost your audience.
I had to make peace with, maybe you had your moment, and now the rest of your life you'll just quietly sort of fade. And you'll have your life with your family, you'll go surfing, you'll figure out something else to do. Kristen and I had this running joke from Spinal Tap, maybe I'd sell shoes. Oh, I think you're at 11. So I had to go through all that. That was the fall of 2011. I just didn't remember that. It took a while. It was like a death. So now it's 6 years later, and there's like people buying a ticket to sit on the floor when it's literally standing room only. I have a level of gratitude.
May you hear the bass notes in a culture that is more and more treble. May you swim in a deeper stream, realizing that you haven't left the tradition when you ask the question, when you go on the journey, when you're filled with curiosity. That is the tradition. May you be comforted that every dimension of your story, struggle, and inner life can be named in its rage, anger, betrayal, joy, connection, peace, love. It can all be given expression because it's all part of what it means to be human, and the divine may even be found in some of the parts that you would most wish to keep down. May you come to believe that there's more going on here, that we're not alone, that Spirit is speaking to each of us. May you, in those moments of disruption, not dig in your heels and keep repeating the cliches, but may you allow yourself to be broken and open up. May you ask yourself, this is so difficult, but I wonder what's going to be created out of even this. And when you find yourself stressed, worried, anxious about the state of our world, may you remember that it's at its worst, when it's at its absolute worst, is often when you're ready for imagination about just what might be possible. And my brothers and sisters, may grace and peace be with you every step of the way. Thank you.
What is it for you at the end of the day that you most want people to know?
What the modern world does is it cuts you off from the depth of life. Just skim the surface, just numb the pain. There is a fullness to life that you can actually experience. Everything you are working and striving for, you already have. That so often we're working, sweating, clinging, grasping, striving to feel worthy enough. And the fundamental good news, what's called the gospel, is the announcement that you're loved exactly as you are.